Well, hello, Rosemary.
Hi, Louis. It's so good to be here. I'm thrilled that I have this opportunity to be interviewed by you.
I'm thrilled that I have the opportunity to interview you and to learn a lot more about the history that you lived through and a lot of people in your age group and in America lived through. So it's amazing that I can interview you and you're living here to talk about it. So let's just go into it. I mean,
sounds good to me.
Yes. And I just want to let the world know this is an amazing woman, not just from her writing a book, just her background. So you need to know who Rosemary is at a later date, Rosemary Jenkins. Now, I'm interviewing Rosemary Jenkins, who has written a 5-star reviewed fictional novel addressed the Black experience in 20th century America. The title, The Southern Phoenix, is symbolic of the challenges Babra, the protagonist, faces throughout most of his life, but was able to rise above the metaphorical ashes to achieve memorable triumphs. But I want to tell Rosemary to tell us about the journey she took in writing it. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, it's been a long journey. To tell you the truth, from beginning to end was over 37 years. So that says something to everybody listening to this, that hanging in there, being diligent and committed pays off in the long run. And another thing I want to say before I answer your question, the title, The Southern Phoenix, was actually inspired by my husband. One day I asked him, I said, what do you think would be a good title for the book? Because the one that I had been using, I really didn't like. And he said, like this, The Southern Phoenix. And I said, wow, that is perfect, because in the book there is a reference to the Phoenix Rising. I said, that is so perfect. And at the time, he didn't even realize that. So I have to give him credit where credit's due. He came up with this wonderful title. And he always seems to have a knack for having the right words at the right time. Now, getting back to your question, my husband and I got married in 1975. He's Black, Protestant, I'm white and Jewish. And in 1979, he and our young son and I went down south to Alabama, where his family and friends live, or many of his family members and friends. And while I was down there, I just soaked up everything. I wanted to listen to all the stories, the anecdotes, the vignettes, whether they were sad, tragic, or very funny. And I was just really inspired by what I heard.
I bet.
Yes, yeah. And then I got to visit a lot of places, including the first home that he lived in. And when you read the book, you'll see that one of the illustrations is the shack that he lived in, which is a pretty good representation of the actual shack. It doesn't exist anymore, but I did get to see it in 1979. And speaking of drawings, I have to give kudos to a number of students in the San Fernando Valley at the high school level who drew every single one of the drawings in this book. So they're wonderful drawings, and their names are mentioned in the book. So look for their names later on when you're seeing credits on movies or paintings, etc. So when we came back the following spring in 1980, I was sitting in my classroom during my conference period, and all of a sudden the muse hit, and I started writing what became this book.
Wow.
And in 4 days, I had actually written the first section of the book.
Wow.
And I have friends that are avid readers, and I said, would you read what I've written so far? And because I kind of thought at the time it was maybe going to be a short story, that it was complete in and of itself. And so they read it and they said, Rosemary, you've got to expand upon this. This is so good. Wow. So the journey was 37 years. I wrote and rewrote and wrote again and rewrote. And I must say that Meredith McGee, the publisher of the publishing company, Meredith, etc., if it were not for her suggestions and advice and patience, this book would not be what it is today, because she was just so helpful. But it did take 1.5 years, and so sometimes when you hear that, oh, this book is coming out next year, 12 months from now, and you say, well, if it's done, why is it going to take that long? Because the editing process is so lengthy. Sometimes, maybe not in my case, but sometimes more than it took an author to write the book in the first place.
Was she able to relate, like, as being an advocate to get this book published, or is she just really just inspired by your writing?
Well, it so happens there's a story in itself. Her uncle is James Meredith,
Okay.
the famous black student who was the first one to integrate Ole Miss in the 1960s. And just as an aside, I've been working with prisoners in the California prison system for years. And it so happens that there'll be a nonfiction book coming out later this year called Juvenile Offenders from Big Wheels to the Big House. And one of the prisoners with whom I've been corresponding is the cousin of Meredith McGee.
Wow.
So he contacted her and said, I think this friend of mine, you know, we've never met in person, but it's like we're friends, you know, has great material. Would you consider it? So she told me yes. I sent her some material. She loved it, and she said, you know, let's sign a contract and we'll go from there. So that's how the book happened to get published, and that whole part was a journey in itself.
Yes.
So I'm really appreciative of what she did and what she's still doing for me.
And that's just God bringing you guys together,
Yes,
to have a publisher
isn't
that
it something?
would back you,
Yes,
and her family went
absolutely.
through the trials and tribulations of what you're writing about. I think that's amazing.
Absolutely.